conversation. This is Cross Question.
Just got 8 o'clock. Ben Kentish here with you on LBC in for Ian Dale, and joining me for Cross Question tonight, a star-studded panel including Alex Burghart, the Conservative Cabinet Office Minister and MP for Brentwood and Ongar. Afua Hagan is with me, broadcaster and journalist. Wendy Chamberlain joins us, the Liberal Democrats Chief Whip, also work and pension spokesperson and MP for North East Fife. And LBC's very own Rachel Johnson is here, presenter, of course, from Sundays 7 till 10 p.m, and also a journalist. You know the drill. If you've got anything you want to ask our panel, if you've got a point to put to them, a question to put, 0345 6060 973 is the number. You can text us on 84850 or tweet at LBC. You might want to ask about the government's new plan to ban foreign international students from bringing relatives to Britain. Perhaps your questions about former Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab becoming the latest of quite a lot of Tory MPs to announce they won't stand at the next general election. Maybe you want to ask, I don't know, about the IMF saying the UK now won't go into recession this year after all. Or perhaps you've got a point about Prince Harry, a court ruling today that he cannot pay for his own police protection while he's in the UK, even though he wants to. Perhaps you've got something absolutely different that you want to ask about. 0345 6060 973 is the number to do it. And don't forget, you can, as ever, watch Cross Question live on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch on Global Player. This is LBC.
Right, let's get straight to your questions. Ben in Clacton is going to kick us off this evening. Ben, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Ben and panel. Should the government, all governments, not just this government, but should governments have an immigration-focused plan to build infrastructure and housing to level off immigration, and it's a benefit to the country. So should they have a housing and infrastructure plan for immigration?
So should we be doing more to build infrastructure to keep up with the level of immigration, Ben? That's your question?
Correct.
Yep. Thank you, Ben in Clacton. Alex Burghart, have governments of both stripes, particularly your party, done enough to keep up with the level of migration when it comes to housing and infrastructure?
Well, look, thanks, evening, and thanks for having me on. Ben's absolutely right. You've got to balance these two things, otherwise you end up with a situation where there isn't enough housing to go around. And the Prime Minister's been very clear that he wants to bring down both legal and illegal migration. You've seen the announcement that the Home Secretary made earlier today about some of the steps we're taking to reduce those figures. But also, the Conservatives have been a party of house building over the past 10 years. We built, I think, about 2.5 million houses since we've been in power. But
it's
obviously,
plummeting, though, isn't it? It's going through the floor. All governments have to weigh these things up. You have to ask, what's the immigration that you want as a country? What's the immigration you want for the economy? And what's the house building that fits with, firstly, the needs of that economy, but also the desires of local residents who should have a say over what their local neighbourhoods look like. Given every Conservative manifesto for the last 13 years has said that you will cut numbers of immigration, the level of immigration, why does it keep going up and up and up?
So the decision that Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, took today is to reduce the number of dependents coming in with students, people on student visas. And this is in response to the figures that were published, I think, in November last year that showed there'd been a very sudden and unexpected rise in the number of dependents coming in with graduate students. And so, we now are in control of our immigration policy. We can take these steps. We can try things out. And this will bring about a fall. But also, in some of the reported figures, I think have not. It hasn't always been reported that one of the reasons they're on the way up is we've welcomed a lot of people in from Ukraine. We've also welcomed a lot of people in from Hong Kong, for very good reasons. And so the figures don't look exactly as they might in normal times. So it's not. It's not just that immigration is sort of rising inexorably on its own. There are geopolitical reasons why we see more people coming.
But you accept it's a broken promise whatever the reasons, when you said to people we will get the numbers down and they've gone up. That promise has been broken.
The Prime Minister has said that his intention is to get both legal and illegal immigration down, and that's what he's working on.
Rachel Johnson.
Well, do you want me to address the point about housing and how we need to have a plan for that, or immigration?
Whatever you want.
Well, the thing is, they are intimately entwined, aren't they? Because, I mean, Michael Gove said at the National Conservatism Conference only last week that you can't have immigration netting off at 700,000 plus and have house building keeping pace with that number, when we already know that the house building target is predicated on net immigration of 250,000. So these two things are going far, far apart now. The more immigrants we have, the more houses we need. But wait, here's the chicken and egg problem with it. The more houses we want to build, the more immigrants we need. Because you talk to a builder and they all say, we can't get anyone to do the work. We can't get the plumbers, we can't get the brickies, we can't get the chippies. And so that's the problem we're in. And I don't know how they fix it. But when it comes to making a plan for it, definitely, just as the NHS needs that famous, fabled workforce plan that I still haven't seen sight of.
Wendy, you were nodding along there.
Yeah, well, I think we've ended up in a false narrative in relation to immigration. And actually, I think what the government have announced today, what the Home Secretary announced today, is the wrong thing. Why are we counting those students coming to the UK to study in the net migration figures anyway?
Yeah, you're right, Wendy. They shouldn't be, because they wash out of the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Earlier this year, I was out with Scottish Affairs Committee at Tartan Week, where there was a whole reception which was made up of people who had studied at universities in Scotland, and they are part of the network that builds the global Britain that the government say that they want to build. So I think that's a false narrative. I think the second bit in relation to housing, and obviously I'm saying this as a Scottish MP, but I'm aware of it in my own constituency, is there are a variety of competing factors in relation to housing. And the government might say that it's building more housing, but it's not necessarily building the right housing in the right places. And when it comes to migration, that's where we get into really quite the toxic debate, isn't it? Because people feel that their infrastructure and their services are being taken away from them, as opposed to having the right conversations to ensure that we're building the right houses and helping people to find employment, whether they're coming from overseas or whether they're in the UK to start with.
Afua.
The problem is that whether or not we have immigrants at 600,000 or 1 million, we cannot keep up our infrastructure as it is. So we have very poor infrastructure at the moment. We have very poor housing at the moment. Lots of people living in social housing that is completely substandard. So even if we take immigration out of the debate, we need better infrastructure. We need better housing in this country. When we talk about immigration and the numbers of immigrants going up and up and up, these are targets that the government, at the same time saying that they wanted, immigration to be at the 50,000 or 25,000, said to UK universities, we want 600,000 students, half of them being undergrads, about 300,000, and the rest of them being postgrads who could bring dependents. So on one hand, you're saying we want to keep immigration down. On the other hand, you're saying to UK universities, we want 600,000 students who put plenty of money into the university system, that keep the universities afloat because their fees are so much higher than UK students. So what is it that you want, government? Do you want immigration law, or do you want 600,000 students? Do you want their money to prop up the universities, or actually do you not want them at all? The government is confused in what they're doing. One hand is doing one thing, one hand is doing another. And in the middle, like I said, you've got poor infrastructure up and down the country, the railways that don't work, people that don't live outside London, are forced out of certain jobs because they can't afford to travel in, or they don't have proper infrastructure, proper trains that run on time. That would be nice for them to be able to come into London to do certain jobs. Don't even get me started on the infrastructure that will allow electric cars to work properly, so people don't have range anxiety. That's why we're so far behind where we are in sustainability goals, because we don't have the infrastructure to support it.
Alex, do you want to come back on that, on the student visas issue?
I don't think I'd heard the phrase range anxiety before. It sounds like it's a terrible mental health problem. Recently diagnosed.
Not something many men would say.
Range anxiety. Look, the government obviously being clear today. Of course, we want people to come and study here. I used to work in universities. I worked in King's College London and a bunch of others, but and there were huge numbers of very able, brilliant postgrads who came and studied with us, and of course we want them to come here and want them to take home with them fantastic experiences of having studied in London and having been part of British culture. But I don't think it's sort of Janus face to say we don't think that all of those people should be able to bring in all of their dependents at the same time.
The point is fewer of them will want to come if you ban them from bringing their families.
I will look. If that's the case, we'll find out. But as I said,
what sort of basis is that for making a policy?
And also, that's going to
come on, so much. Come on. So much policy is based on experimentation, but also. There is such a demand for people from foreign students to come and study at Britain's world-class universities, and I think that there will be very little impact on the number of postgrads who are applying here. We have seen demand grow and grow and grow over the past few years, and I don't believe that is driven by people being able to bring their friends. And for research students, people who are slightly older, doing PhD courses, they will still be able to bring their families. They're more likely to have them. So I think this is sort of being whipped up into a problem that doesn't exist.
Universities, I represent the University of St Andrews, one of the number one universities in the UK. They are suffering death by 1,000 cuts, not only in relation to what's been announced today, but we've still not got any agreement in relation to Horizon. So those postgraduate students you're talking about are making decisions because they cannot get funding here in the UK because European partners are looking elsewhere. And then Turing is not a reciprocal scheme, so you cannot get people coming here under Turing as you did with Erasmus.
Wendy,
so those are big issues for universities across the UK.
Sorry to interrupt. And when I worked at DFE, I went to visit St Andrews. It's a brilliant university, one of our ancient universities. It is not dying by deaths by 1,000 cuts. Highly,
but you are making life more difficult for them to income generate.
No, they are a very successful income generating university. They
and
will.
That's to their credit, not to yours.
I'm not claiming credit for it, although it sounds like you might be trying to claim credit for it by saying thank you when I said it was a good university. But St Andrews will continue to flourish. It is not going to be. It's not existence after 700 years is not at threat because of this policy. So please don't over dramatise it.
Okay, thank you, Ben. A very brief word from you, Ben in Clacton.
Well, I'm afraid to say that the right to buy scheme has got a lot to answer for, and the refusal to replace every house that was sold, that was promised at the very beginning, has caused a lot of the problems in this country with housing. And the refusal of all governments to build, including the Labour government of Blair, I was very disappointed. Refusal by all governments to build enough housing is causing the major problems in this country, and it needs to stop.
Okay. Ben, thank you for your question. Got to leave there, I'm afraid, but thank you. That was Ben in Clacton. I'm going to move on in a moment and talk about Suella Braverman. Rupert in Lancaster is next up with a question. 8:16 the time.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question. Tweet at LBC.
8:19 the time. With me in the studio for Cross Question tonight, Afua Hagan, broadcaster and journalist, the Liberal Democrat Chief Whip Wendy Chamberlain, Rachel Johnson, LBC presenter and journalist, is here, as is Alex Burghart, the Conservative Office Minister. Right, lots of questions to get through. Rupert in Lancaster is next. Rupert, hi, what's your question?
Hi, Ben.
Hi.
Yeah, so should the news stations stop about Suella Braverman's speeding ticket? Because at the end of the day, it's just a souffle.
A souffle?
What kind?
What's a souffle, Rupert? Well, I know what a souffle is, but why is it relevant here?
Because it's meaningless. We're at the end of days, mate, if we're going to obsess about Suella Braverman's speeding ticket.
Souffle?
What have you got against souffle? Anyway, panel. Afua, is it a souffle, whatever that might mean?
I mean, I think the most pertinent question here is what kind of souffle is he referring to? And then after we pass that, I think that, Suella Braverman does have questions to answer. I do kind of take his point. The caller said that we're at the end of days. I don't quite think we're at the end of days yet. I hope not anyway. But yes, there is a lot going on in the world. And I do kind of take his point. But Suella Braverman does have questions to answer. Did she try and get civil service or a private advisor to help her, get a private speeding course or whatever? It's about the ethics that were involved in what she asked the civil service to do. They're not at her bidding, so to speak, in that way. They're not her personal assistants or her personal secretaries. And if she did break the ethics code, then that is something that needs to be challenged. That is something that needs to be brought up. There's something called standards in public office, and that is something that needs to be upheld. So I don't think we need to obsess about it. I don't think it's the most important thing that's happening in the country or the biggest thing that's happening, but it is something that needs to be dealt with. It cannot just be swept under the carpet because, like I said, standards in public office. She shouldn't have tried to get civil service or special advisors to sway something so that she could do it the way that she wanted. If I couldn't do that, she shouldn't be able to do it either.
Rachel Johnson.
Well, I mean, speaking as someone who actually sat through a speed awareness course myself this afternoon, I have quite a lot to say on this subject. I think the first thing to say is Afua is right in saying that if she was in flagrant breach of the ministerial code, she has questions to answer. She can't just say, I paid my fine, nothing to see here. I'm reading that civil servants were emailing the cabinet secretary, thus proving one of my axioms, which is all roads lead to Simon Case. Leaving that aside, I think that this has been a PR own goal because if you think about it, she could have turned this into such a good story, really. She could have said, I'm very embarrassed that while I was Attorney General, I broke the speeding limit. And I would, like so many other people in this country, I'm going to sit through the 3 hours or 2.5 hours of a speed awareness course with my name and my face, visible to the other members of the course. It's a completely confidential course otherwise. If they find you social media, any of it, or reveal who else is in the course, there's a sort of code of honour that you don't.
It would have leaked.
It would have leaked, and then so what? So much better a story than what we're going through now, where the souffle seems to rise over and over again. So question, who was it? What was the name of the question? Rupert. I mean, what kind of souffle are we talking about? A cheesy one, but it's slightly collapsed in the middle, but somehow or other, something about Suella means that this is the souffle that keeps on rising.
We're making the most of this metaphor tonight, aren't we? Wendy Chamberlain.
Well, Rachel's right from the point of view that Suella Braverman is not the only member of the cabinet who's been done for speeding. And in fact, is Tom Tugendhat not serving a ban in relation to using his mobile phone? So, as with all these things, it's not actually about the speeding. But I think there's a number of things. I think one, Suella obviously chose previously to resign for a breach, what she describes as a technical breach of the ministerial code. So she's already set that standard for herself when she resigned in the late days of Liz Truss's premiership. I think the second point here is about the fact that Rishi Sunak hasn't made a decision about what he's going to do. And part of that is because the independent ethics advisor, the government ethics advisor, isn't actually independent. It's got to be Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister who makes a decision to investigate.
But you understand,
so we're still discussing it because he hasn't made a decision.
In saying everything going on in the country right now, war in Ukraine and so on, cost of living crisis, NHS in crisis, is this really worthy of the attention that it's getting? That's Rupert's point.
Well, I think where we are is in a position where we have a fourth cabinet minister since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister who may have to resign. And that means that as a result, we've not got a government that's focused on dealing with the NHS, dealing with the housing infrastructure we've just discussed, or dealing with anything else. So that is the challenge. And I do want to mention the other story in relation to Suella Braverman today, which is potentially the engagement or the non-disclosure or about her work in Rwanda. And that's not to say that the work that she did in Rwanda wasn't good, wasn't worthy, but we are in a position where actually on my register of interests are my interests, because actually it's not for me to make the decision about whether they're admissible or not. It's for other people because I'm at the centre of it. So I find it interesting that she was just checking to see whether the speeding course was could be done or not, but didn't think to check that, and that's an omission for me.
Let's put all that to Alex. Alex, the sort of broader point, yet again, another negative, potentially damaging story about the Home Secretary. Is she becoming a problem for the Prime Minister and the government?
No, I don't think she's becoming a problem at all. I think that she's very committed to solving some of the big problems that matter to my constituents and constituents of most MPs in the House of Commons. And I think, Wendy says that the government isn't, because of this, the government isn't focused on the big issues. Well, the government's absolutely focused on this issue. It's the opposition that wants to carry on talking about them. I think that, Suella has, put her hands up and said, I got busted speeding, I've taken the fine, I've taken the points, I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed about it. And she's, obviously the Prime Minister's talking to his independent advisor about, whether anything untoward was done. And that's the right thing for the Prime Minister to do, to seek advice, and then he'll take a view. But I mean, to Rupert's point about, should news stations stop running the story, I don't think it's a very good idea for politicians ever to stop to tell news stations to stop running stories. They'll run whatever stories they think are right. But I suppose you should be asked whether you think that news stations should be focusing on this sort of stuff or on the
it's about standards, isn't it? This stuff matters.
Well, if it matters to news stations, then it's up to them to run it. That's the thing.
Doesn't it matter objectively whether or not somebody has breached the ministerial code?
Of course it matters whether people have breached the ministerial code. That's absolutely right. But I think there was something I felt sort of slightly wrong. Not wrong is too strong. It felt a bit weird to watch the Prime Minister in Japan, this big G7 summit, the big powers from the developed world getting together to talk about the alliances they're going to make, benefit of the economy, benefit of international security, and we got people sort of standing up, talking about Suella Braverman breaking the speed limit, and it's journalists are totally entitled to ask whatever questions they want, but at the same time, there are also bigger questions out there, and we just. But
it's not. With respect, it's not your job as a government minister to opine on what journalists.
Of course, it's not. I just say that I don't. Everybody gets to talk about. Should talk about what the journalists want to talk about. But I also think that there are some very big things going on in the world right now that we mustn't lose sight of.
Just finally on this, why doesn't Rishi Sunak just ask his independent advisor on Sanders to investigate? Why is he doing a sort of preliminary investigation first?
He's following the process. They have a preliminary conversation, then they see whether there's grounds for investigation.
Okay, that was Rupert in Lancaster. Thank you for your question. We are going to go next to a text question from Tom in Sevenoaks. Tom asks, as Boris Johnson has been referred to the police again over new claims of lockdown law breaking, does the panel think it's time to move on from Partygate? A similar text from Brian asks whether this news will further encourage his supporters. Rachel, I've got to ask you first. Is it time to move on?
Inevitable. Whenever I'm booked to appear on anything public-facing like this, it's I think I was doing Question Time for the BBC on the day Liz Truss resigned, and it was like, you had to face this kind of baying mob. But the first text probably sums it up. It is probably time to move on from Partygate. However, I am not one to call into question, the shoe leather and elbow grease that has been demonstrated by our reporters. They do a fantastic job, and whether I like or my brother likes the results of their efforts is immaterial. If he has questions to answer, he will definitely be answering them. I see that the family name has been brought into it slightly, and all I will say on that point, and then hand over to others, is that, as far as I'm aware, all the rules were followed whenever I went to Chequers. So, which wasn't often enough.
Alex Burghart, just before I come to you, the Boris Johnson spokesperson insisting that the events were lawful, were not breaches of any COVID regulations, and also claiming that the statement from the Cabinet Office on this was clearly politically motivated. You work in the Cabinet Office, was it?
So, look, I do work in the Cabinet Office. I'm one of the ministers there. I found out about this story, the same time everybody else did, and I handed something as I was coming into the studio. And I very much hope that the first bit of that is right, that the events were lawful and there were no breaches of the COVID regulations, and that there's that it's all fine and dandy. But I can assure listeners that this absolutely wasn't politically motivated at all. There's, as I understand it, there was a sift of documents being done for the COVID inquiry, and during that sift, some things came to light. And it was the responsibility under the Civil Service Code. It was the responsibility of the people who found them to hand them over to the authorities. The authorities are going to look into it, and as they are, I don't think it's appropriate as a minister that I say anything more past this point.
Politically, on the wider issue, do you think this is the sort of final nail in the coffin of any comeback hopes that Boris Johnson might harbour?
Speculating on the future of Boris Johnson has proved a futile exercise for a lot of people over the years.
So never rule him out, is what you're saying? Never count him down?
You might say that.
Didn't Max Hastings say you can't count him out until he's lying dead in a crossroads with a stake through his heart, and not even then?
I think that's what Alex is sort of saying.
Well,
it's cross question.
Yeah, I don't know if you watched Guy Ritchie's film Snatch.
A long time ago.
There's a character called Boris the Bullet Dodger. Don't know why that came to mind.
Bullet Dodger, Rachel?
Pass.
Right, going to hear from Wendy and from Afua in just a moment on this one. 8:32 the time. Let's get some news headlines first. Tim Daly.
South Wales Police has referred itself to the policing watchdog after CCTV footage showed one of the force's vans following two people on an electric bike before a fatal crash. The collision on Snowdon Road in Ely killed two teenagers and provoked a riot overnight. Boris Johnson's spokesperson has responded to new allegations of lockdown rule breaking at Chequers. They say the events concerned were lawful and were not breaches of any COVID regulations. And Shell insists it is open to constructive engagement after its annual general meeting was disrupted by climate protesters. They tried to storm the stage and chanted songs. LBC weather, light rain for northwestern Scotland tonight, but largely clear and dry elsewhere, with a low of 2 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC.
8:35 the time. Welcome back to Cross Question, where I am joined by the Conservative MP and Minister Alex Burghart, political commentator Afua Hagan, Rachel Johnson, journalist and LBC presenter, and Wendy Chamberlain from the Liberal Democrats, where we've been talking about fresh allegations about lockdown law breaking by Boris Johnson. We heard from Rachel, we heard from Alex. Afua.
Yeah. Now, I think the issue is that there's a lot of people who cannot move on from Partygate because of things that they went through or their relatives went through, you know, whether it's not being able to visit someone in hospital, whether it's not being able to hold hands with someone at a funeral, whether it's not being able to say goodbye to someone who died. There's lots of people who are still really, really triggered by things that happened during that period of time, during 2020, 2021. So there is people who will still now say that, look, if we are finding out more things that happened during that period, more things during Partygate, then people should be brought to account. There's a lot of people that still feel that way. And let's not remember, let's not forget, it wasn't that long ago. I kind of feel like, we think that the pandemic is really in our rear view mirror, but it's not, and it still affects a lot of people today. There's still a lot of people who are registered as disabled who are still shielding. There's a lot of people who are still very afraid to get back to quote unquote normal life. So there is people out there in the world who, as much as lots of other people cannot move on from the effects of the pandemic. And the fact that rule breaking took place or has done in the past, and there's a question that it might have again, will be triggered by that. And I think that's why it keeps coming round, and we are still talking about it.
And Wendy Chamberlain.
Yeah, so I think we need to contrast two things here. So yesterday, Margaret Ferrier's appeal in relation to the likely exclusion from the estate for 30 days.
She's the SNP.
Yes, so she is the former SNP MP who was found guilty in court in relation to knowingly travelling with COVID during the early stage of the pandemic, where we have to remember vaccinations were not in place or anything. And I think there's a general agreement that what is happening to her is right and proper. There will be a recall petition, and it's over to constituents to agree whether a by-election should take place, and we've got that expectation. So she is dealing with the consequences of her behaviour in a very public and very way. And then we have what we're seeing here, and I do think I agree with Afua. Sorry, Rachel, that potentially if we are looking at criminality in relation to COVID rules, those have to be investigated, particularly when they are at the heart of government, because I think that is one of the reasons why some of these stories in Partygate is so triggering for people, because it is quite visceral, because they feel that they made those sacrifices while potentially others did not.
Rachel, you were sort of nodding there. Did you want to come back? Or?
No, I mean, I don't disagree with anything anybody has said, because, I mean, it was like the sight of the Queen sitting in the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. Lockdown was a collective trauma that we've all been through. And so these stories, when they erupt again, whether they are founded on fact or not, always that you rip off the scab from that wound.
OK, let's move on. Pauline in Watford has our next question. Hi, Pauline.
Hello, Ben. My question is, shouldn't Prince Harry be entitled to security like all the other working royals when he is visiting his country? Is he in exile?
But he's not a working royal, is he?
So, is Andrew Windsor a working royal?
OK, so ask the panel. Pauline, thank you very much indeed. Alex, should Prince Harry, not a working royal, be entitled to police protection? The court says no. What do you say?
So I haven't followed this court case, but I understand that there was a legal argument between Prince Harry and the Home Office about whether he could pay for police protection when he was in the country. And the Home Office's argument was no, because we don't just let rich people buy the police services in the UK. And the judge upheld that. And so, that's, the courts have made their decision. I think we have to stand by that, don't we?
Afua?
Now, the issue with this is that you're very right in saying that Prince Harry wanted to pay for metropolitan police protection for himself and his family when he's in the UK, because he feels that's a level of security that they need because of previous threats they've had and threats that might come in the future. Now, he does pay for his own security. He has security guards in the US, and he also has security when he comes here. Now, there's specific security that is for the royal family and for working royals. Now, when he stepped back from being a working royal, he was no longer entitled to that specific security. Now, his issue comes from the fact that there is threats that have come, and it's the Metropolitan Police that seems to be plugged in and have the best intelligence. Therefore, that's why he wants to pay for them. Now, there's an argument that if he is able to pay for Metropolitan Police protection, if I have a couple of billion in the bank, I could do the same. You know, I want 15 police officers just surrounding me with machine guns. I can pay for it. There will be an argument, or the argument is that the Metropolitan Police are not guns for hire. And that's why he's been told that he's not allowed to appeal the decision to pay for Metropolitan Police officers. Now, his lawyers can overturn that appeal. He has another court case coming up in regards to security. Now, the thing is, with this particular case, I think because the threats against Prince Harry, Meghan Markle and their children are so specific, that perhaps it's not necessarily about him paying for the Metropolitan Police and paying Metropolitan Police officers. There needs to be a way that the intelligence that they have is shared with other private security that he has, so that everybody can be plugged in the same page. And
why shouldn't the police protect him? The police are there to protect British citizens while they're in Britain. They do it for other high-profile individuals. They do it for the Home Secretary. They do it for politicians. They do it for anyone who's got a clear threat against them. Why shouldn't they do it for Prince Harry?
There's specific police that so it's the Committee for Protection of Royalty and Public Figures, that's known as RAVIC, that covers security for high-profile individuals. When he stepped back as a working royal, he was no longer entitled to it. I personally think he should be entitled to it because there are specific threats against him and against Meghan Markle. A lot of them are from right-wing extremists. A lot of them are based on race, misogyny, all these kind of things. I personally think he should be entitled to it, but the fact of the matter is he's not. And so at the juncture we're at now, we now need to have a point where if there is intelligence that the Metropolitan Police or RAVIC have, they need to be able to share it with security that Prince Harry can pay for, so he can have that level of security that he is entitled to.
Rachel?
Well, I mean, that was a very clear exposition of the close protection afforded to former prime ministers and working royals. However, I think that the level of security that Harry is entitled to should not be adjudged by him. It has to be a matter for the security services in this country. So if they decide that Harry needs close armed protection, I can imagine that happening. However, it is not Harry's entitlement to say, I want to pay for close armed protection. The key difference between normal civilian policing and what you've described, the security afforded to the working royals and to former prime ministers and the Home Secretary, is they are armed and they travel in a convoy, and one car, Range Rover, has the gun and the other one has the asset, and it's a whole system. And Harry can't just say, I want that when I come over, as well as saying, I want to have a Netflix series and a Spotify podcast. And
does it say something about him that he's taking this to court to try and demand it?
Well, I think it does say something about him. He's a very determined man whose mission in life seems to be to win the battles he has chosen. These are the hills that Harry has chosen to die on, and they are media intrusion and having close protection, and therefore the near-catastrophic car chase that we all heard about that occurred in Midtown Manhattan last week was for him the perfect exemplar that he could show the courts in London on these issues exactly, which say, look what almost happened in New York, near catastrophic. When I'm in the UK, you need to ramp it up. And it didn't work.
Wendy, Steve's texted in pointing out that festivals and football clubs both pay for police, not because there's a specific threat, but because they want them there. And this text says, Harry was born into this family. He should be treated as such. He's at risk like other royals. It's just bias. That's from Esther.
So on the first point, that was actually what I was going to say, that obviously football matches, so that they can actually fulfil their health and safety regulations, duty of care, etc. They do. There are payments made for policing at those events and have done for a number of years. But I suppose what the difference is here is, and where I agree with Rachel, is I genuinely believe that if there was specific intelligence that the Metropolitan Police received in relation to direct threat to Prince Harry or the Duchess of Sussex's life, that would be acted on and protection would be given, because obviously that would be a catastrophic failure of intelligence and security services if that were not to be the case. But I think there is a difference in terms of buying those services, particularly when those services are, I've mentioned I was in the police. I've policed football matches, but I was never, firearms trained or potentially being involved where you would take the attack to protect the person that you were protecting. So I think this is a different set of circumstances. Clearly, the legal case has still got to go on, and clearly there's much still to work through in terms of a long-term relationship. The suggestion from Esther, she says it's biased. Do you think he's been unfairly demonised? He's been discriminated against in some way? You don't? Well, I think we probably could have. Clearly, it's still pretty fresh in terms of what the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have done and indeed the decisions they've made. I would like to think that as these things work through, that there'll be some kind of agreement reached, whether that's in the public eye or not. But it does feel like we're still in quite a fevered atmosphere where we can't necessarily get that sense of perspective. OK, let's go back to Pauline briefly. Pauline, wonder what you've made of what you've heard? Pauline, are you there? No, Pauline's gone. We will never know what Pauline made, but we will know what Bryn in Newport wants to ask in just a moment. 8:47 the time.
LBC.
Come
Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:50 the time. Ben Kentish here with you on LBC, and here with me in the studio for Cross Question tonight, LBC's very own Rachel Johnson, Wendy Chamberlain, the Liberal Democrat Chief Whip, Afua Hagan, the broadcaster and journalist, and Alex Burghart, the Conservative Cabinet Office Minister and MP for Brentwood and Ongar. Next question is a text question. It comes from Bryn in Newport, who asks, what needs to be done to calm things down in South Wales? That following the pretty worrying scenes we saw last night in Cardiff. Alex Burghart, what needs to be done?
Well, look, this is a very unfortunate circumstance, and it seems that there's new information coming out all the time, and I don't want to speculate about that, but I just. Obviously, what needs to happen is that we can't have people on the street setting fire to cars and threatening members of the public, and that's just not. It's really not an acceptable way to behave. But the police has got the local police had to find a way of getting in and calming things down and making sure that people feel safe in their neighbourhoods.
How big a concern is for you and the government that this will escalate, this will spread? We saw in 2011 just what can happen, or was it 2011, was it the Tottenham riots, when something like this could act as a spark? Is that a concern?
I very much hope that won't happen. I've certainly seen no indications that it will. It seems to be very localised and subject to specific concerns in the community. But Bryn's right to raise it, and I don't think of all of those families in Cardiff who'll be worried about their property and their families tonight, and that's not acceptable.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Well, I think we need to start by the fact that 2 children are dead as a result of the crash last night. We absolutely shouldn't forget that. But it does feel like, as I mentioned, I was a police officer, and I'll go right back to that bit of policing by consent. And you do that by having the trust of the public. And yes, I don't know what the full set of circumstances are, but there's absolutely no doubt that the violence that took part last night was apparently fuelled by social media reports that there was a police van involved in the accident. We then heard this morning from the Police and Crime Commissioner that was not the case. And then since then we've had an acceptance that there is CCTV that shows a police van in the area shortly before the accident, and as a result of that, the South Wales Police have referred themselves to the IOPC. So that is a set of circumstances that is just incredibly worrying from that trust perspective. I mean, we're not a European militaristic police force. That's not how the police force in the UK, police forces and police service in the UK came into being. But how do we prevent it? I really, really hope to goodness that South Wales Police are exercising every single community link they have in that area of Cardiff at the moment to ensure that they are working with the effective community leaders to try and minimise any potential future violence. Because I think, sadly, as a result of what seems to have happened today, they themselves will have lost the room.
I appreciate we can't be too specific about the details of this because not least they're still emerging. But as a former police officer, Wendy, how worried are you about what seems to be a sort of continual erosion of faith and trust in policing?
It's incredibly worrying. I mean, there's other police officers in the Commons, but I'm the only woman, and I feel like I've talked a lot about the Met since I was elected, and that's incredibly worrying, particularly what we've seen with the Casey report, what is happening, the recent revelations in relation to the Daniel Morgan inquiry. But even just today, and Police Scotland reports of an ongoing review that shows bigotry, misogyny, those cultural changes that are not just happening. And what is really key and at the centre of it is leadership. One of the things that shocked me about the Casey report, and I'll be quite frank, a lot of the stories in the Casey report did not shock me. I joined as 22 in 1999, but one of the things that did was the fact that training for police sergeants involved a 24-slide PowerPoint. If you actually want to be serious about tackling culture, about demonstrating good behaviours, about cracking down on sort of the canteen culture and the chat, your first line managers need to be on it. They need to show what is acceptable, and they need to lead by example and show what won't be tolerated. So I think there is a huge amount of work to be done. It's very easy to just say that this is limited to the Metropolitan Police and it needs to change. It is an issue across forces, and we will not improve the situation if we don't improve the diversity of people joining the police service, and we'll fail to do that if this continues to be the narrative that we present.
Rachel Johnson, Prim was asking what needs to be done to calm things down in South Wales, but I guess the question too is what needs to be done to restore some of this confidence.
I think I can't add to what Wendy, with all her wealth of experience, says, but what I feel this goes back to is the question about Suella Braverman's souffle, because I think the contrast of having rioting in Cardiff, not a place in Wales that you associate with civil unrest, at the same time as you've got the main questions about the Home Secretary, who is in charge of law and order for the party of law and order, being, looked into by ministers and the Laurie Magnus for something so tiny. What this, to me, suggests is the party needs to get a grip of the narrative as well as of law and order and the police forces. And it's very bad optics for them that the focus on Suella Braverman is not what's she doing about Cardiff, but did she try and dodge a speed awareness course?
Alex, what do you say to that?
Well, look, I'm glad we got back to souffles, but look, as I said earlier, the government is absolutely not distracted by these things. The work of government is still very much focused on the major issues that the country is facing. And I know that colleagues in the Home Office will be taking what's going on in Cardiff enormously seriously. But there are operational decisions which will be the responsibility of the local police force as well.
Okay. Final test question, well not final, penultimate test question from Eric in Birmingham, who asks, I have to do this in a sentence I think, panellists, Ron DeSantis is going to launch his presidential campaign tonight while Donald Trump will go on trial over paying Stormy Daniels next year. Is it all over for Trump? Is it all over for Donald Trump? Afua?
I hope so.
Okay, short and sweet.
You said a sentence. Okay,
it was a very good short sentence. We like it. Alex?
Never rule out Donald Trump's chances of turning the situation around for himself. I think it's very difficult to know for certain what will happen in the US presidential elections.
Will Rishi Sunak welcome the prospect of having to work closely with Donald Trump if he's still Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister will work professionally with whoever the American people choose as their president.
Wendy?
I think Donald Trump is increasingly talking to his base, and that base is not necessarily what wins you presidential elections.
And Rachel?
The more trouble Donald Trump is in, the more he seems to like it. His currency is attention. So the more court cases and civil trials he loses, in a way, the more popular he becomes. So no, don't ever count him out. I refer you to my previous answer about crossroads and stakes through the heart.
Don't rule anyone out. Could it be another Boris Johnson-Donald Trump partnership in 2 years' time? Not necessarily ruled out, according to our panellists. But let's finish with our final question, which, as ever, is a fun question. This comes from Zara in Blackburn, who asks, a school class in Florida has had a surprise visitor who came armed with free guitars and concert tickets. Ed Sheeran. So who's the most famous person who turned up at your school while you were a pupil? And who would you have liked it to have been if, like me, nobody vaguely interesting or famous turned up at your school? Rachel?
Oh, goodness. Well, just before I went to my prep school, Princess Margaret turned up in a Rolls-Royce and removed her son, Viscount Linley, because he was homesick. But when I was at a later school, I've just had the school reunion actually this afternoon, as well as doing a speed awareness course, so it's been a busy day. Pete Townsend of The Who used to turn up because his daughter was in the year below me.
What was he doing? Just picking
coming
his daughter?
to parent-teacher
Did he ever do
or
no
school
gigs,
assembly with his guitar?
Wendy?
So the only famous person I can think of, and they're not famous, is there was a book called Supergran, which was made into television. It had Molly Weir and Billy Connolly did the theme tune, and the author came to my school, which then, once it closed down, became Waterloo Road for a time when Waterloo Road moved to Greenock.
That's a claim to fame.
That's
so you went
where
to
it was.
Waterloo Road?
Yes, for a short period. And in terms of who I would like to be, in my teens I was very keen on being a war correspondent, so I'd love to have had Kate Adie there.
Yes, that would have been great. Afua?
No one famous came to my school, although my primary 3 teacher brought a lamb into school one day.
A lamb?
That wins.
Why?
We did ask her why. She didn't come back.
Was she called Mary?
Yeah, no, she was.
So she brought in a lamb and didn't explain why she'd brought in a lamb.
Oh, there's a lamb in the class, and it just sort of like ran around and pooed everywhere. It was such.
I have so many questions.
Yeah. I mean, I saw questions today. It was a fun day though. And in terms of who I would like to come to school, Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
Very
legitimate. Alex?
I had this dim recollection when I was about 10 meeting Charles Dance at my school.
Oh wow!
But I don't really remember why. But he had a very nice car. He was standing beside it, and I would have loved it if Frank Bruno had come to my school. I'm a very big boxing fan, and he was, it would have. Yeah,
have you met him?
I have now met him.
You've now met him.
For a while, I was vice chair of the APPG on boxing in Parliament, and I met Frank. Frank used to live in my constituency. He doesn't anymore, but he is such a lovely man, and he's everything. They say never meet your heroes, but yeah, he is. He's every bit as charming and kind as you would hope he would be.
Sarah, thank you for that question. Huge thank you to our panellists, to Rachel, to Wendy, to Afua, and to Alex. Thank you for your questions. Coming up after the news, we're going to be talking about Andrew Tate, as a new survey today reveals the staggering scale of support for his views around work, around women, and around success amongst young men. What do you think is driving his popularity? What is driving so many young men to buy into the ideas, including some pretty violent misogyny, that he is spouting all over the internet? And what do you think we do about it? Is this just about consumerism and young men desperately clamouring and chasing financial success and status? Or is there something deeper? Is this about a crisis in masculinity? Is this about a lost generation feeling there's no good role models for them out there, and Andrew Tate is the best they've got? That next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the police watchdog is sending a team to decide whether it will carry